Okay, my name is Derek McNeil, and I'm the dean here at the Seattle School. And it was a pleasure for us to have Jimmy McGee, who has spent time with us actually for a couple days. And but particularly today, Jimmy shared as a keynote speaker for our, also I call them conversations as opposed to conference, on humanity through community. And the subject was the myth of the single story. And I got a sense of where that title emerges from. But I wanted to begin our conversation today really asking you, I've known you for a bit, I've known you for a while, and I've always been impressed with this sort of prophetic quality about you. I think you come in and you don't just talk, you change the atmosphere a bit. That's how I'll, at the moment, identify kind of a prophetic quality. And kind of the Seattle School love story. And it's helpful for maybe some of us to hear a little bit about what did that emerge. When do you begin to see that emerge in you, or feel that sense that I'm called to change the atmosphere and not just simply speak to a few things?
People have asked me about this prophetic thing. And it's not like one day I woke up and said, okay, you got this prophetic stuff. In fact, I don't even know if I'm self-aware that I would describe myself as such. Most prophets never call themselves prophets. Mm-hmm. The title was assigned to them. Mm-hmm. I think if I would start with anything, it would probably be first with passion. Okay. Being around my father and growing up in Chicago, I got to a point that I got tired of status quo. And what drove me to have a voice or to speak up wasn't not the desire to put attention to myself, but to put attention that something needs to change, and I am dissatisfied being a part of mediocrity or status quo. And a quick story is that I told people I was with InterVarsity for 16 years, and I never had a national position for 11 years. But my dissatisfaction with the way we were dealing with race caused me to engage Steve Hayner, allow him to listen to me, and have influenced the national organization through the Urban Project and through issues of race, not because I was a designated assigned leader in the structure, but because my intolerance to continue to react, I had grown impatient. And I said, we need to be proactive. And so I wanted to be proactive and stop reacting to people doing something to me. So I think that's where it started from.
Really, again, and I hear the sense of internal pull and call for righteousness, and I'm just use this language, that I want rightness. I need to see rightness, and that's what's pulled me into this.
That's exactly right.
That desire to see rightness or goodness even has pulled me into this.
But there's one other thing I gotta add, is that there was also this belief inside of me that I'm not getting the whole truth. That there's something missing here about story and narrative that's not being included here. I know the very first time that came evident was when More Than Equals came out by Chris Rice and Spencer Perkins. Bob Freiling sent a book specifically to my home to say, we want you to endorse this book as a part of the organization. I took the book, immediately threw it on the bed and said, I don't have time for this. My wife picked it up, read it, and said, Jimmy, I think you might want to read this. So I read it. And then immediately, it wasn't saying, aha, it was saying, uh-oh. My problem was that I saw the organization, as evangelicalism does, tend to go to this as a silver bullet. And as I read the book and I said, I'm having theological angst, I'm having historical angst, I am also having limited ways to address the problems of race. And I immediately started praying and seeking out other people who can speak to me, because it was anachronistic and it was short-lived on a very individualistic theology. And I said, this is not going to help me, because if I'm going to be helped just by getting white friends, I got enough of those already. So how come the situation hasn't changed? And so that's where I said, I need more people who can speak into me. And that's where God brought me C.T. Vivian I hate to say it, I will say, through the Oprah Winfrey Show. And I sought him out. He lived 3 miles from my house. And I pursued him. And then from there, I had already started a relationship with Tom Skinner and James Orange. And they began to feed me a theological diet that balanced just the carbohydrates I was getting from evangelicalism.
Wow.
And because of that, my learning became holistic. And so I didn't just think it was a pendulum between individual and systematic. I understood culture and mores, and that it was a complex set of racism that was both irrational, pernicious, and intentionally evil. And I needed something more than the simplicity that was being offered to me. And that's why I went for it.
I like this sort of notion of my yearnings or my hungers for more, and in your case, led you to ask the people who you saw were doing more.
Yes.
And so the mentoring was very important for you.
Oh, very much so.
And the sort of what it sounds like a number of people offered to you was a way of imagining being different. It's not just simply the internal angst, but a sense that there's something that's wrong.
That's right.
And you're not telling me the whole thing. And then people came, at least you actually sought them out, who could give you a deeper, broader imagination of what might be going on.
I mean, see, that's exactly the way I took it. So I didn't think I got the summation of someone's thoughts just because I read their books. So when John Stott would write things that piqued my interest, I actually wrote him. And when I was thinking about my educational graduate pursuits, I actually inquired to him. I met him 2 or 3 times when he spoke in town. He actually wrote me back and said, I don't have enough knowledge about you personally to encourage you one path versus the other, but he gave me enough holistic perspective that I engaged him. And so for me, when I read someone's book, it wasn't me thinking, okay, now I got what they got. To me, that was an open invitation to a dialogue. And so I knew I hit a dead end in 1991, that spiritually the way evangelicalism was using me. It was a utilitarian relationship. They used me for their purposes and did not fill me up. I found people who had resources to continue to replenish me. So I sought them out. I interviewed spouses. I interviewed the authors. I went to spend time with them. And then I listened and asked for more recommendations personally that I pursued. And that happened, it wasn't just trapped in one mono-ethnic group or just through one gender. And it wasn't to just age. I sought my peers as much as I sought my elders. And then people find it funny. I even sought my elders who had already transitioned, who informed me so much more, like Du Bois. What I got from Du Bois illuminated my undergraduate understanding of sociology, what I discovered through the Souls of Black Folks and the Philadelphia Negro, but even more importantly, his understanding of story and narrative. He knew that the story of the looking glass self to Black people kept us entrenched in our own oppression. So when he had the chance to be the leader of the NAACP, he decided to be the publisher of the Crisis magazine, because he knew we needed to tell stories of the strength and the fortitude of Black people. And then, while he was a professor, he created a Negro journal. Using his students, they convened for 1 week at the end of the year, every year, to talk about the state of Black people. And the students would report how Black people had overcome despite slavery. And what it was saying was the fortitude and the narrative that was against the Samboism, this de facto subjugation that we had to Jim Crowism, and it showed the fortitude and the willingness, even though he himself was not a Christian, his influence by those who were Christian, like Henry McNeil Turner, informed me. And that's where it came from. And then the problem that I have, though, is that none of those were speaking to this generation's Black evangelicals. And those who were listening, they didn't, because they were positioning themselves for a place of notoriety instead of a place for influence and change. And for me, I didn't want the notoriety. I wanted the
You
change.
wanted it to be different. It needed to be
I
different.
wanted to be different.
Yeah. I love this sense of you as a learner. I mean, because in some ways what you've described is someone who's hungry to understand.
Yes.
And both in terms of people who are available to me currently, but also this sense of history, or
Yes.
not only this period in history, but prior periods in history, to get some perspective. And you talked, I mean, in your presentation today, I could hear your love of history, history. But also I love the way this sort of juxtaposition of story, and history is the backdrop of the story.
Yes.
And those pieces in you, the sort of learner in you. In the panel today, we talked a little bit about unlearning, which is an interesting piece. Part of learning is unlearning.
Yes.
And I'm going to bring you forward. I know you are the president and CEO of Impact, and you work with young adults in this current context. What do you think we need to unlearn in January 2017? What needs to be unlearned, and as we move to because in some ways it's hard to shift out, well, it's hard to get a new perspective, a new imagination, without shifting out of an old set of ideas.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the myths that we live by that we need to unlearn?
You know, the thing that I'm trying to teach my students right off is to get rid of this ridiculous dualism of what is spiritual and what is secular. It's a way of creating a spiritual hierarchy that is not employing change to the world. So what it does, it creates this dualism that I believe is real Gnostic. And it doesn't allow us to change physical structures and systems in today's world. So what I'm trying to do is tell the students that you need to get rid of this notion that I'm spiritual because I'm in a Bible study, but it's unspiritual to have a study group. That's ridiculous. God has given you the stewardship, not just of money, but of time, relationship, and resources. So you passing your course, whatever major you got, is as much a spiritual assignment from God as much as you studying the book of Acts. And to say one is spiritual versus the other is to limit the influence of the kingdom of God permeating space. And so when I'm trying to eliminate this secular spiritual reality for my students, is say part of the problem with today's students is this frustration that the church, even now, and sadly to so, we have so many black churches that are equally silent about black issues of oppression as our white churches formerly were. Pastors who just mention it as a moment, let's be in prayer that Eric Garner died and his family. And then we go about our agenda of the service. I think that communicates to my students that, one, we don't have an answer for it, and that this is peripheral to God's idea. So my idea, I'm trying to help them understand that when Jesus says he's Lord of occupying every space that you occupy. There's no space that you're present in that he should not be present in. And we need to remove both this idea of secular and spiritual if we're going to be transition. I think the other piece that we didn't talk this morning about that I really have a pet beef about is that when we talk about oppression and we talk about community, we always talk about being to under-resourced or underserved, which I have a passion about. My only problem is the power of transition and pivoting change is not just being with under-resourced people. So what I try to do with my students is to assign them the idea that God may want you to be John the Baptist in the grassroots, or I want you to consider being Daniel in places of power. We need to infiltrate spaces for the kingdom of God. And so that's part of the issue. That's what I saw from Du Bois. Du Bois was infiltrating spaces of learning to change the narrative for black people. It wasn't just that he was just an erudite and this intelligent person. He pivoted to say we need to do this to change the narrative and the projection of the direction we're going. That's where we need to do with our students. And that's what I'm thinking.
And you're really raising the question of charity versus justice.
That's exactly right.
That in my actions of charity, I need someone to be less than.
That's right.
so that I can in some ways offer them the possibilities of empowerment, if you will.
That's right.
But justice may call me to fore as well. I have to look at the partnership that I have in some ways not allowed to happen.
That's right.
And we are both changing a system that we're in, not just simply you are doing something on my behalf. And those are different imagination. And so you're raising the question of the imagination and action.
That's right.
How we imagine something may shape how we go about it and what we think is a successful venture. So if my imagination is strictly charity, and that's not exclusively, but if it's exclusively charity, then I may feel very good about myself.
That's right.
If I'm able to help somebody.
That's right.
Or I give money to the person on the corner.
That's right.
Or I give somebody a meal. Different than thinking justice with charity.
That's right.
Where I have to think about the system that perpetuates that I'm in my car driving by you. And that I feel comfortable in my car driving by you, and I'd like to kind of bring you on my level, but if not, I feel better that I gave you something.
That's exactly right. And that's the part that we have to change. And so what we need to do, I think we're very good at elementary steps, but we never say, so what's the next imagined step? We're in the age where there's a lot of conversation about multi-ethnicity. And quite frankly, I think it's very utilitarian and limited in space. When I hear multi-ethnic churches and this big push that we need to have multi-ethnic congregation, and I said, basically what I tell my students, I don't care about Sunday for 2 hours. That means absolutely nothing to me. What tells me is the litmus test for the quality of multi-ethnicity that happens at this congregation is demonstrated Monday through Saturday. It's accessible not to a closed experience on Sunday. It's experienced by everybody else to witness. How is that transformative in other spaces so that it's just? And the other misconception, because of the work that we have, I deal with this all the time. People think because our work is directly just to students of African descent that we're not multi-ethnic. And I said, far from it. In fact, way far from it, because one, we don't live in an exclusively black world in the United States. Every day there's transactions and interactions with multiple communities, and we very much have little time to ourselves. But the quality of our multi-ethnicity is measured by the strength of the appreciation of our own identity. And so you cannot say I'm completely multi-ethnic without really diving in and really exercising this muscle that is in atrophy all the time of identity. And so that's where I have to unpack the story.
I like that notion of unpacking the story you talked about. But you talked about it both individually and collectively.
That's right.
I want to ask a question because I know this tension tends to come up for people when they hear conversations that they think they want to label social justice conversations, and that is Jesus. I haven't heard you say anything about Jesus. I haven't, So I'm curious about how you think about that, and I would say even sometimes the ways we use Jesus. And I'll say this in a propaganda sort of way.
Yeah.
But where does Jesus fit into this? And maybe it's our conception of Jesus that we're talking about.
No, we were talking earlier about glasses. And so when I crossed that bridge of 40, I discovered that the glasses that I have was not sufficient enough to help me read. And so that meant I was missing things. So I had to go and get a new prescription that allowed me to have a reading aspect of my lens so I can focus in on the words, but also gave me the ability to see things on my computer screen. And so it's 3 different lenses and everywhere else. And my problem is that is some of the problems we have of what we see in Jesus in the scripture. That we have lenses that do not allow us to see different levels of Jesus. So the way we talk about Jesus, we talk about sin. And we talk about sin that interferes with our relationship with God. But it doesn't help us to unpack the narrative of the text. When you look at Jesus, when he's engaging Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19, it's interesting. Zacchaeus is curious about Jesus. Jesus comes across as this short man wants to see him and says, today I'm going to come to your house. The journey to his house, Zacchaeus begins to confess sins, but he ain't talking about lying. He ain't talking about something in his heart. He's talking about how I've been doing unjust by the people through my tax, through my vocation. And God, if I done something wrong, let me pay them back 4 times as much. And then let me give money back to the poor. Now, it's interesting. I hear a lot of people talk about evangelism, but they never talk about those sins. Those sins never come up. That's justice. It's not social justice. That's justice. And so when I hear this stuff about justice, it tells me again, we continue to peddle Jesus and as products instead of understanding the enormous nature of how Jesus is an intrusion to every aspect of my living. And every aspect of my living means that I care just about your gig as much as what you're doing at home when you're watching the game. I care about what you think about when you sleep, and I care about what you do when you're awoke. But we continue when people say, oh, Jesus, you're just talking about the social justice stuff. It's because we're in a school that talks about psychology and trauma. Almost everybody knows about the trauma, the devastation when a family goes through divorce. How the kid is beat up because mom and dad no longer love each other, and they feel fragmented because really the security of a child is really the love between the husband and the wife. And I would say the church, specifically this church that we have today, we have been beat up over the divorce of social justice from fundamentalism. And we love both mama and daddy. And because mama raised us more than daddy,
Split loyalties.
there's split loyalties here. And so therefore we have a fragmented view. And so the way I understood a half-truth is just as much a lie as a lie. And so because we've only believed half the truth, then we've been deceived by a lie. And so part of my problem is, can God bring some renewal to bring this marriage back together? So that I understand that justice horizontal is also a justice that God is concerned about vertically as well.
Well, you raise a couple things and that I'm going to begin to kind of see if we can. I love this notion of unpacking the story, and this is also the tension in the individual and the collective.
Yes.
The sort of social justice versus a personal salvation piece. But I want to have you speak to the other crowd, the social justice crowd, that says, do you still believe that stuff? You still believe that? And the sort of notion that the social mechanisms are better to focus on than spiritual, which are metaphorical.
Yeah.
And so I'm taking you on both sides of that. How do you think, or how are you thinking about that in the times? Because you'd mentioned today the need for spiritual formation.
Yes. So here's part of the problem anthropologically, is that we've let the West dominate our view of interpreting Jesus. This idea of a linear approach. This has been my frustration for years in working with evangelical groups. For them, it's always evangelism, then discipleship, then missions. It's a domino effect. It's this idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But Jesus, our faith, did not emerge from a linear world. It emerged from a circular dynamic world. So that if you imagine holding on to a steering wheel or looking at your wedding ring, you never know the beginning and the end. So when you grab hold to a part of it, you grab hold to all of it. And so that's been my dilemma and my pain. And so what people fail to realize is that my call to know God intimately and personally is never, ever compromised. And that I spend time in spiritual retreats. I spend time in realizing that the most important thing in my life that God called me to is not the impact movement. The most important thing God called me to is not my wife, my marriage to my wife. It's not my parents nor my children. It's not even to living. The most important thing that God called me to in the beginning, which speaks to every aspect that I think of, is to himself. He called me back to himself. And from himself, it called me to a place of wholeness and attachment and integration of realities. So I would say to anyone who would dare to say, well, what's that part about Jesus? It's the beginning and end for me. It's not either or. It's not first or last. It's all a part of. It starts and ends with him. And so when I think of Jesus and his intimacy of talking to his disciples, he talks about, let's go away. I don't want to hear that. Let's just go away and just chill out with my Father. Let's just hold on and breathe. because he understands that our life is not about activity, it's about being. It's not about doing or activism. It's about letting the very nature be converted, so that justice is not something that I do. Justice is a part of who I am.
And I love the notion that justice rolls down.
It does.
It flows out of.
It emanates from us.
Yes.
And see, and I think that's the problem. And that's the frustration, quite frankly, with oppressed people groups. Oppressed people groups saying that the injustice is not just a deed, it has damaged my whole sense of identity and personhood. And what needs to be redeemed is all of me. Not just you got your foot on my neck, or that you have me in segregated realities. It's that you've limited my humanity. And Jesus has come, and here's the part that I would think they missed too. Jesus has come, and what he did on the cross, he did two important things. He forgave me of the sins that I committed. But here's the part for the social justice people, what they got to get. He also has forgiven those who committed the sins against me. It's a holism there. So that he wants to release me from the debt and bitterness of people who have created an act against me, while also redeeming me from the acts that I've done against him and other people. Both of that happens at the cross.
And that's not just a change, that's a transformational shift.
It is. It is. And it's the most beautiful thing of what he wants. That I feel like neither one on site, I think they missed that. And I don't want either one. I want both.
I appreciate that sort of, it needs to be goodness,
Yeah.
not partial.
Yeah.
Not partial. Last question. This is, again, a question of the age, a question of the opportunity of this moment. Not just in the sense of the political season, but in the spiritual season. Not just in the physical season, but the emotional season. And I guess this is maybe to the categories we sometimes get limited. We talk about millennials, etc.
Yeah.
But there is a generational piece, as we get older and look and see younger folk who must take up this mantle. And you're working with younger folk who must take up this mantle. What is the thing you hope they hear? And what is the thing you hope to transmit? And you mentioned some of this at the beginning, but I'm coming back to this, the sense of in this moment, for such a time as this, what do you feel the sense of calling for us to do?
I think it's an age for our generation of de-investment. Not investment, but de-investment. And what I mean by that is that some of my early interactions with you was at Abundant Life Christian Center in Decatur, Georgia, when you, Carl Ellis, Brenda Salter McNeil, and Bill Pennell came to speak at Woodrow Walker's church. That's close to 30 years ago. Right? See, and you may have forgotten that. I didn't.
I didn't forget it, but I didn't know how long it was. Thank you very much.
And so you having access through Fuller to Bill Pennell and all those people, me having access to Tom Skinner and Bill Pennell as well, the accumulation of the gift of mentorship means that good responsibility, good African thought life says that it's not to be accumulated to be hoarded. It's supposed to be accumulated to be disseminated. And what today's generation needs, they need the coupling of knowledge and wisdom. See, if we just disseminate them knowledge, they may not have the wisdom to steward it. So we need to give them the knowledge and the wisdom. So I'm at the age now that I'm accumulating the wisdom to manage the accumulation of knowledge. What we need to give them is both. They need both wisdom and knowledge. They lack the knowledge. They want to problem solve, but it's not the accumulation of knowledge that's going to solve their issues. It's the wisdom. It's the temperament. It's the patience. It's the understanding to know, baby, you need to let it cook. Don't mess with it right now. Just let it cook. Or to say, take it out. We can't do anything with this. We need to stir it up all over again. And I think that's what today's generation needs. And what they're hungry for is this major dissonance between our generation, I would say, and theirs. Is that they are yearning for what we got in the mentorship and Pennells and the Skinners of life. They're begging for it. But they don't know how to ask. They don't even know how to be present. They think, all right, I got a piece of paper. Can you give it to me now? And you're like, no, that's not how you're going to get it. You get it by
It's
just.
not quite a commodity.
It's not a commodity, and it's not a fill in the blank. It's like, so where'd you grow up? Well, I grew up here. Well, let me tell you where I grew up. Oh, wow, but that's not getting me what I want. Oh, yeah, it is. That's what I got from C.T. Vivian. When C.T. Vivian invited me out for breakfast, he could talk about anything he wanted for 2 hours. I was paying to get whatever he got, and how he dished it, when he gave it to me. I didn't have any questions saying, you're not giving me what I want. No, dude, you're giving me more than I want. I'm going to ask for a little bit more of this potatoes, but this steak tastes good, and I like the gravy. Give it all to me. And then I discovered that I was still digesting that meal for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. That's what today's millennials need. Because what they need to do, they're entering into a world that is unfamiliar to them. They have lived a place of entitlement. I hate to say it, for even black college students, a place of entitlement that they don't know that has been an aberration from our history, from black middle class prior to. And so what they need to know is how to be subversive in an adverse reality. And know that you can be productive, you can accumulate wealth, you can even infuse change. And they need that from us. And they can't get that just solely in a book. They can, but they can get this just by hanging with us.
And you're raising, again, particularly for an institution that wants to not just simply inform, but to form, we have to engage knowledge and wisdom.
That's right.
And so you're bringing the sense that there is not just simply your accumulation of facts, but also the sort of shaping of who you've become as a person.
That's right.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to have the conversation, a pleasure to hear your thoughts, and for your presence. I'm very grateful for any time anybody comes here with both a priest and prophetic quality, because it's both. And I thought prophetic early on, I leave with a sense of the priesthood. And so thank you very much. It's been great to have you, and thanks for sitting down and chatting.
Great institution, great people. Thank you, Dr. McNeil.